What's up guys, Patrick Hall here. I have to get something off my chest and I'm a little ashamed to admit this, but Lee and I recently did a photo challenge where we had to shoot different waterfalls, and many of the people on YouTube called me out and said that my images were just too saturated. Tusa says the greens in Patrick's shots are revolting, like an amateur photographer who just found the green slider in Lightroom. Chris says Patrick needs to stay away from the saturation slider. Guilty as charged. John says Patrick should crop out the right side of the image and make a 4x5 vertical or square composition. And Sean says, I cannot unsee what I just witnessed. We're just not gonna acknowledge. So I thought it would be fun to re-edit my photo in some software that I've never really used before, Luminar 3, and I've never really re-edited many of my photos before, so this should be interesting. Maybe by pulling back a little bit on the saturation sliders and maybe even cropping the image different, perhaps I could actually come out with a better photo than what I submitted for that contest. So I first want to give a big thanks to Skylum Software because they have sponsored this video. They sent us a free demo version of Luminar 3, which is what I'm going to be using to edit this photo today. And I know a lot of our readers have said, why aren't you guys using more Luminar 3? It's the perfect alternative to Lightroom and Photoshop, and we've used a lot of other softwares on our channel. And to be honest, I just haven't had the chance to sit down with this software. So I've been playing around with this for the last couple weeks, and I want to walk you through this workflow and show you some of the features that this software does. And then halfway through, we will get to the actual image and see if I can edit this in a way that looks a little bit more reasonable. So I have the software open right here. And the first thing you'll notice with Luminar 3 is they don't use the same catalog system that Lightroom uses. For me, the catalog system in Lightroom has been a little confusing and complicated, especially when you start moving files around and backing everything up. Sometimes your files can get lost and then you have to resync them. The way that Luminar 3 works is you go over to your folders right here and you simply add whatever folder you want where your pictures are. So in my case, let's go to Pictures, and then I have a folder called Images for Luminar 3. I'm going to hit OK. And it's simply going to import every image that's in that folder. And I really like this perhaps better than the catalog system because I hate importing photos. And in many cases, I'm just opening up my raw editor and I want to see all of the images that are within that folder. Sometimes I'm adding new images to that folder, or the shoot has been downloaded in several different sequences. Or if I'm doing a composite or something, I might be adding assets to that folder, and in a program like Lightroom, I always had to go back in and import more photos, and then only those photos are showing up, and then I have to select show all photos. It's just kind of a pain. So I do appreciate this new catalog system where you just see everything within your folder. And of course, you can then add multiple folders here so that you kind of have your own catalog built out in a completely different system than what I'm personally used to. So here we have a bunch of images. We are currently in the library setting. Let me go ahead and go over to Edit. And one thing you'll notice immediately is that Luminar 3 kind of flips where your photos are. Instead of having your film strip here on the bottom with all of your images, you actually have your film strip over here on the left. What they've done here on the bottom is they've added a panel that allows you to see what they call Luminar looks. Now, Luminar looks are basically presets that allow you to edit your pictures much quicker and faster. And they're subdivided into different categories. So if I click here, you can see I have the landscape presets loaded, but I can go over here to dramatic, and you can see it gives me a whole different set of presets there. If I scroll up and go to portrait, these are a bunch of presets that you can load for portrait. So it makes it really easy to automate your editing process. So if you have a bunch of looks that you constantly are doing over and over again, and you shoot different things like product photography or weddings or landscapes, you can save all those presets in a way that makes it really quick to edit. What's also interesting, I haven't done this yet, but you can also buy looks and workspaces for Luminar 3 that are designed from some of the top photographers in the industry. So if there's a particular landscape photographer that you like, you can actually buy and import their looks directly into your own software. If you're a portrait photographer, I know a good friend of mine, Dixie Dixon, she has a bunch of presets that you can download. So if you like that really airy, washed out kind of look that Dixie's known for, you can get those looks, import them into your own software, and quickly start editing in a way that's very similar to what she's doing. For this video, I'm gonna go back to the landscape settings. And as you can see, we have a bunch of different options down here if I wanna quickly just add a preset and be done with this image. Now, I know you guys are interested to see what this image looked like before I did all of this work in Photoshop. Let me click on the raw file, and here's the file that I actually took out on location. And as you can see, I spent a long time editing this image to get it to this point. So we're gonna see here in a minute if I can edit this even quicker and come up with an image that isn't quite as dramatic as this, and maybe I can make the colors look a little more natural. But before I do that, let me play around with a few of the sliders and show you, one, how similar this software can be if you're using it for the first time, and two, Luminar 3 does things very differently than other softwares that I've used. So I want to explore some of their editing tools so that you can see exactly how automated and how quickly this software can be for editing photos. Now here's a raw image straight out of camera that I took right down at the beach right outside of our house. And as you can see, it looks pretty good, but I think this image really needs to have more punch in the sky, and I think it really needs some overall warmth. Even though this looks like a warm sunny day, it doesn't really convey the feeling that I was kind of going for when I took the shot. So if we go over here to the right, this is where all of the editing modules lie. Now when you first open Luminar, it looks like it's just giving me a few AI filters, and I don't see the standard filters that you might be used to. So if I go over here to add filters, we can actually go to raw develop. And what's neat about this workflow is it's only adding the modules that you actually want to use. So if you don't like to sharpen or do lens correction, you don't have to add that to the right side. It makes it really clean and easy. Another thing that's really unique about this software that I haven't seen in other software is that you can actually rearrange the modules. So if I want to move, say, my clarity above my saturation, I can just drag it right above that, and then it will actually give you different effects, of course, depending on how you have everything layered. By the way, is it software or softwares? Because you heard me say softwares. So with the raw develop module open, I can just drag some sliders over, and this is doing things that you're probably very familiar with. I'm going to go ahead and take this off, and let's talk about the Accent AI filter. The Accent AI filter is interesting because it's using over 10 filters, and I don't exactly know what filters those are, but it's intelligently trying to figure out how to make this image have the most dynamic range and have the correct sharpness and the overall contrast and color. So out of curiosity, let's just boost this filter all the way up to 100 just to see what it does, and I can use the little eyeball here to turn it on and off. And what's really crazy is normally I hate sliders at 100%. That almost never looks good, but in this case, I actually like what it's doing. I mean, look at the trunks of these palm trees. I mean, they really come to life with this filter on. It also adds a warmth, and it's adding kind of a lot of highlights up here. Let's see what the sky enhancer does if I start boosting this up. Take that to 100 too, just to see. And you can see it's starting to add a lot of detail up here. It does have a heavy vignette. I don't know if that's just because of the wide angle of this camera or because of the lack of blues in the shot, but I think, this one you might want to bring down to something like 30, but really cool. If I wanted to add a little bit more warmth, let's go to filters, and we could probably find a warming filter here. If I go down to creative, there's something called golden hour. Let's click that. And basically this looks just like a warming filter, so if I turn it all the way up, it becomes very nuclear, but somewhere around, I don't know, 30, 35 looks pretty good. So I don't want to bore you guys to death and go through every one of these filters. Let me just show you a few of the other filters on a couple other images, because there are some really interesting things that you can do in here. So here's an image I recently shot in a cave here in Puerto Rico. Now, as you can see, I've done a lot of work to this in post-production. I actually added this light beam, and I resized Robert here, and I did a lot of dodging and burning of the cave. But one thing that's really cool about Luminar that I saw is, let me see if I can find this. There's a filter called, here it is, Texture Overlay. And what's neat about this is if I load a texture, I can actually come in here and load this smoke that I used for this image. And it will apply this smoke as a texture on top of my image. It's almost an overlay built in without having to do any masking. You can then click on Texture Overlay and go to the blend modes, and it will give you all of these different blend modes that you can use to put this right on top of your image. I'm going to leave it just on the normal mode, and then I can actually turn down the opacity, so I can add a bunch of smoke. 100% would be the full picture that I added. Or if I come down to something a little more subtle, maybe to like 16, I can then also zoom in and out so I can place this exactly where I want. And if this feels like it's a little much, this is a little too much smoke all over the scene, I can actually easily brush this out with a simple mask. I can just click on this brush tool, hit the brush, come up here to erase. Basically, you have paint, which is going to add more of the effect, and you have erase, which is going to take away the effect. And then I come up here to opacity. Maybe I'll go kind of heavy-handed at 73%. Let's make a large brush, and let's just start brushing out the smoke on the topmost part of this image, maybe off of this rock as well, and maybe off of Robert's face. And if I click this layer on and off, you can see that it's just added a little bit of smoke on top of my picture really easily, no crazy masks. I'm not having to go in and do any kind of clipping masks or deal with any kind of opacity. I can simply do it all here in the texture overlay module, which is really, really cool. If you want to add light leaks, or if you have some cool textures that you just want to put very faintly over your images, this is an extremely easy way to do it. And with these really simple tools, you have a lot of flexibility. Now let me show you one more filter that's pretty cool that is probably going to cause a lot of controversy here, because if we look at this picture here that Lee submitted to the contest, he went a little crazy and added a bunch of light rays, a bunch of God rays, and as you can see, it looks really, really fake and totally over the top. Now, I know how Lee did this. He actually built this by hand, made every light ray, blended it. It took him forever. When he showed me the Photoshop file and all the layers, I was kind of blown away that he went down this path and put so much time into it, but Luminar 3 actually has a God ray option where you can build this in automatically, and it gives you a lot of flexibility because it lets you place the light rays exactly where you want. It's non-destructive so that you can go through and you can really fine-tune it, whereas if you do it manually like Lee did, once you build these, I mean, there's really no easy way to then change them and give them a different look. There's just a lot that you can do with this, and I know you probably think God rays are a little cliche and they're a little over the top, and you're absolutely right. I see this used a little too much in photography, but in those situations where you may have real rays and you just want to embellish them a little bit more, or if you're doing a commercial shoot and your client asks for God rays, this is probably the best software I've ever seen that can create this effect. And because it's non-destructive, you can easily tweak it after the fact. So if you say, hey, it's too many God rays, or your client says, I love what you did here, but can you tone it down a little bit? You're not having to rebuild that in Photoshop. You can actually just come back to this filter and adjust it a little bit more. They have a bunch of different things. You can do the Orton effect. You can add some fog. They have cross-processing. These modules are really interesting because, again, you can add only what you need, but it gives you a lot more flexibility. And if you don't know how to do a lot of this stuff in, say, Photoshop, which can take a long time to learn, it's really nice that they have these built right in here. And for many of these modules, I haven't seen any of this in Lightroom, which is kind of the industry standard. So really cool. I could see how fast this could make your editing. But let's now get back to the original point of this video, and let's now try to edit this photo and make it look a little more realistic than the crazy edit that I did. So the first thing that I want to do is let's just see what the Accent AI filter does for this photo. And while I don't love the colors in here, it was definitely an overcast day, and as you can see, it was very, very green and muddy, and it's not the prettiest light. I really like what it's doing in the overall tone and the overall curves. I don't know exactly what it's applying, but this is pretty amazing. Like, this is a good start. So I'm just gonna leave this at 75, but we definitely need to address a few other things. I think the next thing I wanna deal with is the saturation. I'm gonna skip Sky Enhancer because the sky is kind of blown out. And in order to get the sky that I had in here, I actually had to composite multiple images. So I'm going to leave the sky blown out since that was the natural raw file. And let's go down to saturation and warmth. What Vibrance is going to do is it's going to kind of boost some of the colors that aren't represented in the photo quite as much, while limiting the brightness and saturation of the colors that are expressed heavily. So what I do a lot in my photography is I actually bump the vibrance up a little bit, but then I pull the saturation back down. It seems to just give kind of a balanced look to your colors. Something like this I really like. This is a good starting point. Now, because there's so much greenery in this photo, I want to try something kind of interesting. There is an effect here in Issue Fixers that is called Foliage Enhancer. And what's really incredible about this, I've been using this the last few weeks, is that this filter seems to only find the colors of foliage and allows you to change the hues of those. So if we increase this, we can see that in this example, the Foliage Enhancer is kind of getting fooled here. We can see that it's not really affecting the rock face, it's not affecting the sky, it's only affecting our green tones. And if I go over here to the hue slider, I can totally change the way these leaves look. So if I had an image that was kind of shot in the fall, but it didn't really have the right colors for fall, I could change all of the plant life and make it a little more brown or a little bit more red. Or in this case, I want to make this a little more green. So instead of it having this kind of yellow-green color, I want to push it over to green and make it very green. This location is basically in a tropical rainforest, and the greenery, although the camera doesn't show it to be this green, it definitely felt this way. It had just rained on us, and it was an incredible scene. I really want to showcase the greens, but I don't want to go quite as nuclear as I did in the first edit. So if I turn this on and off, you can see that I've just made the greenery pop a little bit more. It's a little less muddy, but I don't think it's over the top in this case. But we do have a new problem, and that's the green in the water is also amplified. So I think what we need to do is we need to add a simple mask. I'm going to just take the brush and paint out by erasing the green that is on this water. And I'm just gonna be kind of crude here and just brush over the water and remove that greenery. And as you can see now, the Foliage Enhancer is really only affecting the top part of the image. Another powerful tool that I use all the time is the Hsl Filter. And if we come down here to Professional, because it's a professional filter, let's click on HSL. And if you don't know what HSL is, it's Hue, Saturation, Luminance. And what's so cool about this filter is you can control so many specific parts of your images without having to create complex masks simply by using the hue sliders. So for this image, I know from experience that yellow and green is going to affect this image probably more than any other slider. So let's start there. Let's go to yellow. So because the yellow slider is really affecting the rocks the most, I want the rocks to have some contrast against the scene, so I'm actually going to pull the yellows down just a bit. Now the greens, I'm going to leave those alone because I feel like we already affected those with the Foliage Enhancer. You could kind of do that effect in the HSL panel as well. Aqua, blue, purple, magenta, I don't see a lot of those colors in this image, so I'm going to just skip that. Let's go over to saturation. And again, I think for this image, orange, yellow, and green are going to be the three that we really focus on. So let's just slide this around, and you can see orange is really affecting the rocks. I think the more saturated the rocks are, it starts to look kind of grungy. It looks more like dirt. But if I take orange all the way down, it really starts to bring out the gray in these rocks, which is kind of how I remember seeing this scene when I was there. You can see the yellows, again, kind of do the same as the orange. It just adds this tonal quality in the color that I feel like makes this image look a little more grungy, and I'm trying to sell this location, so I don't want to make the image look more grungy. So maybe we bring down the yellow just a bit, maybe somewhere there, -20. And then finally we have luminance. Now what luminance is going to do is it's going to make these different colors either darker or lighter depending on where we slide those. So maybe we come down to orange again, and you can see this is really playing with the color of the rocks. I kind of like the rocks nice and bright, so maybe we'll bump those up. Let's go to yellow. And if I bring the yellow up too much, I feel like I'm starting to lose all of the drama that's caused by the shadows in the scene. So I don't think I want to do that. But I don't want to take it all the way down. This looks way too eerie. This feels like you're at a ride at Disney World or something. So maybe somewhere right about here, maybe like -4 is just enough. Let's see what greens do. Maybe something like right here is good, and the green, I'm just going to leave that at 0. Another filter I want to try is I think I want to add some contrast to this image. Now there's a lot of ways that you can add contrast, but what's really interesting in Luminar 3 is they have something called color contrast. Now to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what color contrast is doing behind the scenes. I'm not technical enough to actually know what's going on in the background, but having played with this module, I have to say in many cases it does add a little bit of oomph to your image in a very pleasing way. So if I come up to something like 40%, that looks pretty good to me. And then we can take the hue, and this is really where some interesting stuff starts to happen. It's almost like when you take an image and you make it black and white, and then you start adjusting all of the individual color filters within the black and white, you can see the whole image just really start to accentuate different tones. I feel like that's what this hue slider does. And if I just go back and forth with these, I can find some that really accentuate the water more, and then others really dull the water out and make the foliage stand out more. I want to go something right around here that darkens kind of the pond water, but also makes the waterfall itself pop. So maybe right about here at 149. So I think this is looking pretty good. One thing I want to do is also sharpen some of this image, and Luminar 3 has a really interesting sharpening tool. They have multiple sharpening tools, but there's one here called Detail Enhancer. What's interesting about Detail Enhancer is that it allows you to do sharpening over different tonalities. It lets you sharpen small, very fine detailed parts of your image, as well as medium and large. So it's not looking at the entire image as one image and then giving you a radius. It's actually breaking things up into fine detail where there's a lot of contrast, and then areas that have medium contrast, and then large areas that might be very strong and bold lines, kind of like you would see up here along the skyline, or maybe here the rock against the water, maybe this shadow line here. Those would all be large details, where small details would probably be all the little tiny details within all the leaves. And if I zoom in here, you can really see just how much of an effect this adds if I turn this on and off. You probably won't notice this when it's small, but when you get close up to the image, especially if you're publishing images, high res to the web, or if you're giving them to your client as the final image, you're definitely going to want to add some sort of sharpening. Now, one filter that I forgot to add that I use all the time, it's probably my favorite filter ever, that is color balance. And I don't know if I like this filter just because I used to do a lot of color balance when I worked in a photo lab, but this I feel like is the one filter that gives me the most control over the overall look of my image. The reason I love color balance so much is it's one of the easiest tools to use to give your image a look or a color grade. And the reason for this is color balance separates your colors by shadow, midtones, and highlights. And in many cases, if you take the color spectrum of your highlights and push them in one direction, and then push the color tones of your shadows in a completely different direction, you can make your images really have a look that pops out. That's exactly what I did up here with this image. And the reason this image kind of looks post-processed is because I really pushed some of the shadows and the highlights into different color spectrums, which in my opinion makes the image pop out, but I think this is why a lot of people felt like my image was a little over-processed. So it's very typical to start pushing the shadows into a cool spectrum. I feel like that's something I do most of the time, but I think for this image I want to do the opposite. I actually want to take the cyan and reds, and I actually want to add some warmth to the shadow. So I want to go pretty subtle with this. So I think I'm going to go to 11. And then for our yellow and blue, let's try pushing the blues up just a bit. And if I toggle this on and off, you can see quickly just how much of a change this has made to my overall image. But we need to work on the midtones and the highlights. Because I removed just a little bit of green in the shadows, I think I want to push the greens up just a little bit in the midtones. If I go yellow on the midtones versus blue, I kind of like the blue look. Let's go pretty subtle with this, and maybe just leave that at 7. So now let's move to highlights, and because we moved the shadows so extreme, even though it was kind of subtle, you can really make this image jump off the screen by tweaking the highlights. It's going to be the highlights and the shadows that really allow you to have this look that I'm talking about. And so I might push the highlights towards magenta a little bit. And then if I bring the yellows back, you can see if I start to go blue with the highlights, it's starting to make this image just look too wacky. It's already got a slight processed look to it, but if I push the yellows back in, it really brings a lot of warmth into the scene. And so something right here, maybe around 20, looks pretty good to me. So let's toggle the color balance on and off. And you can see where we've gone. This still might be a little extreme for a lot of you guys out there, but I feel like this image, before I did the color balance, still has like a muddy green look to it. Whereas with the color balance settings, I've now really made the rock face pop a little bit more. I do feel like this color balance is a little too strong in the foreground, so I'm going to click on our brush, hit erase, and let's just erase a little bit of that effect on this foreground rock, because it's just starting to look a little too warm for me. So if I turn this on and off, you can see it really adds a nice contrast to the top part of the frame. So I think this is probably a pretty good place to stop. So if I come up here and show you the before, that's the raw file, and just look how muddy it is. But by just applying a few different effects here in Luminar 3, I'm able to take the image to this point. So before we export this, let's work on the crop. I had a lot of complaints of people saying that I did a horrible job composing this image, and I definitely think I could have done better. This was a very rushed photo shoot because we were running out of light. But I do think that the right side of the image is a little heavy. So let's go up to Tools and let's go to Crop. Somebody said I should do a 4:5 ratio and turn this image into a vertical. So here's what this image looks like, kind of framed straight on in the 4:5 ratio. Unfortunately, we have removed a lot of the foliage, which I personally like in this image. I feel like you lose a little bit of something by not seeing exactly how buried in the woods that this waterfall is. But let's go ahead and export this. We'll go up to the export here, export image. Let's call this Luminar 3. We will export it as a JPEG at sRGB. And because I saved this file in the same folder, it immediately loaded in the film strip here. So you can see the bottom thumbnail here has the little slider control, so that means that that's the raw file, and then this is now the JPEG. And if I go between the two files, you can see here's the original edit that I had, which now that I've been looking at this image so long, it does look absolutely crazy. And here is the more subtle edit. So I'll let you guys choose which image you like better, if you like the one with the vertical crop and the more traditional edit, or if you like the original edit that I had where it's the wide angle kind of panoramic shot with the more cross-processed look. So that leaves us with the $1 million question, or should I say the $9.99 a month question. Can Luminar completely replace your reliance on Lightroom? And that is kind of a tough question to answer. Lightroom has been the standard. It's been a staple for, goodness, probably like 15 years now. And they've had so many chances to revamp their software to make it run as smooth as possible, even though it doesn't always run as smooth as possible. Luminar is really kind of the new kid on the block, and for as new as their software is, it runs surprisingly well. I mean, you have a lot of the features that you have in Lightroom. You can make an adjustment to one image and then sync it and batch it over a bunch of images, which is really helpful when you're doing something like weddings. With these modules, you really can get a quick edit on a single photograph without having to tweak a whole bunch of settings. Obviously, I tweaked a lot in this video just to kind of show you what you can do, but their AI filters are actually pretty impressive. If I come over here to this image here, and I just bump up the AI filter, and then bump up the Sky Enhancer filter, and show you the before and after, I mean, that's pretty incredible for just two simple sliders. I mean, if I just wanted to post something to my Instagram page or just wanted to put something on Facebook really quickly that I shot in RAW that I'm, editing on a computer, you can't beat that. Like, I don't think I could get that edit that fast in Lightroom. The AI filters in Luminar 3 are absolutely wonderful. Another thing that I really like about Luminar 3 is I love that you can add the modules that you want and create your own workflow, and then you can save those workflows and you can have a workflow for all the different types of images that you shoot. So that's really, really handy as well. The biggest problem that I have with all of the raw editing softwares out there is that for the type of work that I do, I still like to composite a lot of images. I create lots of layers. I do lots of clipping masks, and I'm using the pen tool. And for me, Photoshop is still the king of all editing software because of that. If you're not the type of photographer who likes to blend different moments in time or likes to composite different photographs into their images like I did with the cave shoot, or if you're not clone stamping a bunch of details and liquefying and tweaking your model and the clothing and trying to make a perfect image, and you're simply trying to edit a raw file, I think you should download Luminar 3 immediately and at least give it a try, because if you're just trying to edit one single photo, you want to edit it in less than 5 minutes and then get it out, put it on your social media, I think perhaps Luminar could be the absolute best solution for that. So that wraps up this video. I think this was a really fun exercise. I've never used Luminar like this. I've definitely never gone back and re-edited photos that I've taken in the past and done a second edit to them. So that was really exciting to me. If you're interested in this software, it's only $69. You can head to the link in the description below, give it a free trial, And for $70, I mean, you really can't beat that. A lot of the other software out there, as you know, has the subscription model. I think Lightroom and Photoshop can be between $10 and $20 a month, and that adds up very quickly, especially if you're not using photo editing software every single day. So I'm really excited to announce that Skylum has given us a discount code for all Fstoppers readers. So if you use the discount code below, you can save not just Luminar 3, but all software within the Skylum library. So for more content like this, make sure you head over to fstoppers.com where you can see a ton of blog posts that we release every single day. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel below so that you can get notifications for videos just like this. And if you want to learn from some of the best photographers in the world, landscape photographers that are way better than me, head over to fstoppers.com/store where you can check out our full-length tutorials.